Hello, everybody. I am Rex, and this is the start of a new series on the channel where I'll be painting some minis and terrain for various tabletop RPGs and wargames. Today, I'll be painting two vampire trees from the Tides of Darkness campaign. These trees come from a Japanese inspired village, and as such, they will have a very cherry blossom tree looking appearance. As I prime these trees, I might as well tell you what the vampire trees are. The vampire trees are a carnivorous plant that uses its beauty to attract unsuspecting victims. Once the victims get too close, then the sap of the tree will paralyze them, leaving the victims free to be drained at the tree's leisure. The sap is also a very sought after resource because when distilled into a poison, not only does it paralyze the victim of the poison, but it also leaves them in a hypnotic state, which leaves them prone to suggestion. And when they wake up from this hypnotic state, they wake up without any memory of being poisoned in the first place, which, as you could imagine, makes it a very valuable resource for cults. Now that the primer is dried, I'm going to just put a base coat of mahogany brown on the wood sections of the trees. I think this would just be a good base coat for when I put the red-gray next for the bark. After I airbrushed the mahogany for the first tree, I decided to try to just brush on with a very watered down mahogany on the second tree to try to get it more into the recesses and less on top for when I'm going to do the dry brush of the red gray on top. After it was done, I noticed that there wasn't really much of a difference between the airbrush and the dry brush, and the airbrush was only about a minute or two faster in total, so not much of a difference either way. Now, moving on to the leaves, I know pink is a hard color to paint over black, and so I went through with a bright gray and did multiple thin coats of the gray over the leaves until the black disappeared. At this point, I wasn't too worried about any speckling of the gray falling down onto the wood of the mahogany color of the wood, because I was going to do a grayish red dry brush next. Now, moving on to the dry brush with the red gray paint. I chose red gray because it would look a little bit more like a more almost dead tree, which fits with the vampire tree theme. Um, when I was doing the dry brushing originally, I tested it on the back of my thumb, and it was still a little too wet for the first brush strokes on the tree, which still looked good after it dried, so I didn't bother to go back and touch it up with the mahogany again. And one thing to note with the underside of the leaves is I realized they weren't going to be seen from pretty much any angle, and so I didn't bother to paint them. There's still black primer underneath. Now, onto the actual pink of the leaves. I tried a couple different ways before I settled on just painting it all a base pink. I tried dry brushing the pink over it, and it wasn't a lot of contrast. I wasn't really happy with it, and I eventually just settled with putting a pretty watered down pink over the entire leaves again, which had some speckles fall down onto the wood, but they were so sparse that they actually ended up looking more like leaves that had fallen down and stuck, and so I just left them. Now, onto the final part of the painting process that actually sets these apart from normal cherry blossom trees, the red highlights in the leaves. I tried a few different ways. I tried dry brushing underneath the pink and having a very thin pink, seeing if it would bleed through, and it didn't to an extent that I was happy with. I knew if I just took a brush and just slowly edge highlighted all of the leaves, that would take forever. And so I ended up just settling on a very heavy dry brush over the pink leaves, and it, in my opinion, looks pretty good. So, especially for such a fast paint job, one of these trees, or each tree, took me about 2 hours in total to go from completely no paint on it to completely painted. And with the red leaves done, these trees are complete. Before we move on to the reveals, I'd like to just thank you for watching. And this was the first episode in a new series that will hopefully be coming out monthly if I can keep up schedule. And yeah, on to the reveals.